you can't be the only person who spent your life as an Army officer who's reached these conclusions. Like, what are they thinking at the Pentagon? There have to be people who've come to the same positions.
Tucker, we have right now, I think 43, could be 44. It's usually 43 or 44, 4-star generals and admirals. You have to think about that. We have a force of 1.1.
It seems like a lot.
Well, let me explain just how much it is. We have 1.12 million people in the armed forces. In other words, you add up all the armed services, that 1.12 million. In World War II, at the height of the war, end of 42, beginning of 43, when we had 12.2 million men under arms, we had 7 4-stars. 7 4-stars. I can tell you who they were. You had George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the Army, Douglas MacArthur commanding in the Pacific, Eisenhower commanding in Great Britain and in the European theater, Hap Arnold for the Air Force. Unofficially, he was the vice chief, but he was effectively commanding the air forces. And then you had Leahy, who was in the White House. Admiral Leahy as the liaison officer. He was effectively the unofficial chairman of the Joint Chiefs for FDR. Then you had Nimitz and King. King was the CNO, and Nimitz commanded in the Pacific. Now, somehow or another, with only 7 4-stars, we managed to survive the greatest, most destructive war in history, and fortunately end up on the quote-unquote winning side. Now we are blessed with 43 to 44 4-stars organized into multiple commands designed to blanket the globe with American military power and interest. I think it borders on lunacy, especially since we don't live in the world of 1920, 1945. This is the 21st century. Today, if you have forces forward, they're easy to identify, easy to target, easy to destroy. So what's the point of having a lot of forces forward? Well, we can always reinforce them. No, you can't. How do you get across these vast oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, when your opponents have submarine fleets? How many ships do they have to sink, supply ships, transports, before everybody says, that's it, we're not going? Same thing true for aircraft. Well, we have better aircraft. We may have better aircraft, but we don't have very good air defenses. We've neglected air and missile defenses for years. In the Army, they always treated theater air and missile defense as sort of the redheaded stepchild because we haven't fought anybody that compelled us to defend ourselves from missile and air attack. Well, those days are over. In other words, if you press this war with Russia in Central East Europe, it will reach us here in the United States. People aren't thinking about that.
How many Americans do you think are assisting or fighting on the side of Ukraine right now?
Well, I don't know, but I imagine it must be hundreds because the President of the United States, as you know, has authorized combat pay for Americans in uniform in Ukraine. Now, didn't specifically say uniform, just said Americans serving in Ukraine. So I imagine large numbers are in other uniforms, not necessarily American. Some may be assisting contractors or working with them, but a substantial number. And again, thus far, the Russians have been very careful about not necessarily targeting them. And it would be a mistake to assume that the Russians don't know where they are. And the latest strikes that we've had over the last couple of months have been all the way out on the border with Romania, the border with Poland, the border with Moldova. Precision strikes, Kinshal missiles carrying 1,000-pound warheads. Great accuracy, very destructive. Why? The Russians are sending a message. If you think you're going to hide from us if you come in here, you're not going to do that. If you cross these borders, we will annihilate you. You'll never get to the Dnieper River. We won't permit it. And we need to come to terms with these realities because we can't defeat it. And see, this is the sad part. Somebody will say to me, well, Doug, you don't sound very patriotic. I'm not patriotic. I put my life on the line for the country. I have no compunction about fighting or killing anybody if we need to do it. Don't get me wrong. We don't need to do this. That's the point. This is unnecessary. And if we do it,
I think a lot of Americans suspect that maybe our military forces weaker than we think it is? You're saying it's much weaker than we think it is.
Think of it like an engine. You have a 500 horsepower engine in 1991, and the 500 horsepower engine goes from 500 to 400 to 300 to 200 down to 100. Now, you don't notice very much because you don't put the pedal to the metal. It's good enough to get to the grocery store. It's good enough to drive on 95 for 50 miles. But if you put your foot down the pedal, you're going to discover that this is a very weak engine. It's not performing very well. It doesn't have what it once had. In other words, we've gone down in the horsepower arena militarily. This is the warning. This is what people need to understand. People say, well, what about all the money we spent? That's a damn good question. You spend all this money, what are you getting for it? Where did the money go? Who's making the decisions? And you have separate services. Each service lives in its own world, has its own doctrine, its own bureaucracy, its own way of war. All this jointness is just, fugazi nonsense. And you got lots of generals, and every general has a reason to exist. And every general has 1,000 men in his headquarters, every 4-star. And every 4-star needs money for his projects. And this becomes a giant trough feeding frenzy for people on the Hill. And nobody ever bothers to stand up and say, why? What are we doing this for? You just look at what's happening in Africa. Niger decided they'd had enough of their French overlords. The French retained ownership of virtually 50% of everything of value in their colonies in Afrique du Nord. Now, that's French business. Whatever the French want to do, it's fine with me. But my point is, we're involved there because we built an airstrip in Niger, and we marched in there to defeat Islamists. The truth is, there weren't very many Islamists until we showed up. Now there are lots of Islamists. What's wrong with that picture? And now it turns out the whole population, in addition to hating the French, has decided they hate us. So we've had a coup in Niger. It's now being backed by the Algerians, as well as the neighbors. And people are saying, well, we trained them. We gave them assistance, and they're turning on us. Oh, it must be the Wagner mercenaries. There aren't any Wagner mercenaries in the place. In other words, that we may have gone in there and blown it on our own, made mistakes of our own, backed the wrong horse, whatever you want to call it, doesn't occur to anybody. Well, it must be those Russians, or maybe those pesky Chinese. We have this unfortunate habit of seeing ourselves as always wearing the white hat, always doing everything right, and we miss the truth. And the truth is, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines do what they're told. They'll go wherever you ask them to go. They'll put their lives on the line. But it doesn't always make sense. And sometimes it may be for profit, not for national interest, not for the interests of the American people. And that's the problem. And no one's been watching this thing. They see the flag, everybody salutes, everybody listens to the music, everyone's enthralled. But the old 500 horsepower engine is gone. We're down to 100 horsepower. And the 100 horsepower engine is trying to make it all over the world. It's not going very well. And we haven't even talked about our economy, obviously.
Given all of the, what you're saying is horrifying. And some of it, with respect, does seem kind of obvious. Almost nobody in the Congress is saying what you are saying. Chris Christie never served in the Congress, but he was a governor. He's been on the national stage for quite a long time. He's running for president now. He recently went to Ukraine to meet with the world's highest paid actor who runs it. I think we have a clip.
I believe that the overwhelming majority of the American people understand that we need to be with Ukraine on this fight.
Do you maintain the current commitment? Do you expand it, or do you contract it?
I increase it. My position on Ukraine, which is that we haven't done enough. And that while I think that President Biden has certainly done better than President Trump, and President Trump did better than President Obama on this, we still have more to go. We can spend this money now and have Ukrainian soldiers fight our war, or we can spend a lot more money and American blood later to fight in Taiwan.
How do you respond to that?
When we were in Vietnam, I was 16, And I remember General Westmoreland telling everyone, if we don't fight these people in Vietnam and to fight them here, we'll be fighting them in Los Angeles and in all our major cities. So we have to stay here and win this, or that's what's going to happen.
A lot of them did go to Los Angeles and build thriving businesses, actually, in the end.
Well, my hat's off to them. That's fine. I have no problems with that. But I think it's a lot of nonsense, you know. And it's the same thing with Ukraine.
But Chris Christie's not stupid. He's very dishonest, obviously, but he's not stupid.
Well, he has donors.
That's what that is.
Of course. Where's he going to get his money? Well, there, Governor Christie, we want this war in Ukraine. We want to see that man Putin removed. We got to get rid of him and his regime. Why? Well, you know, it's not democratic. Most of the world is not democratic. There are a lot of people that don't think we're very democratic anymore.
We're not.
So who are we kidding? I think Americans are waking up. And Christie is probably there for name recognition and more money, but I don't see him winning anything.
No. But he does, I mean, in a blusterier way, he's expressing the same thing that the rest of them, Nikki Haley and all the rest.
Well, doesn't this also divert attention from far more serious matters here at home? It really does. What does it cost Christie to say, we have to beat those Russians? Nothing. Doesn't cost him anything. It costs the country a great deal in terms of money, prestige. What Fitch just downgraded our credit worthiness one more time. And people say, oh, it's not a problem. You know, the bond yields are on their way up and prices are on their way down. When is the Treasury bond fire sale going to happen? When do banks offload these Treasury bonds that they bought when they were at zero interest because they're now worthless? What's going to happen in China, in Japan, in Saudi Arabia, where they have lots of bonds? I mean, we're fragile. We're vulnerable. Nobody even mentions it because nobody wants to fess up and tell the truth. We've overreached. We're running on fumes. What about this economy? What are we building? What are we producing? You know, that's what made us a great power between 1865 and basically 1920. That's when your industrial base was created. That's when you had people like Edison and Tesla, Rockefeller, all these people. They were tough and they were intelligent and they were effective. The only person I see out there now who's remotely like that is Musk. He's building something. He's creating something. When you do that, you create employment. I don't see that happening. High-tech startups? The hell are they? What are they doing for us? A new app on your phone? We've got to wake up and say, oh, well, AI is better algorithms. Better algorithms do not replace human beings, and they don't necessarily create opportunity for people to work. We've got to think this thing through very carefully. We haven't done that. What about our energy sector? Oil, gas, we've killed it. We have what, half the refineries we once had? California had something in the neighborhood of 43 or 44 refineries. They're down to 23. You know, how long before suddenly we're in another energy crisis and we need to rapidly refine fuel? Can we do it? Well, the answer is it's going to be tough. It applies, the same thing applies to Raytheon. We want 200 missiles and we want them now. Well, we have no surge capacity. There's no excess capacity built into anything. What are we going to do with this scientific industrial base? What about our agricultural sector? What are we doing for that? I mean, high-end manufacturing is dead. We need to repatriate lots of industries. That's what President Trump talked about. We absolutely need to do that. People say, well, we want free trade. Well, I'm 100% for free trade as long as it doesn't kill us. But if it kills us, then I'm for protection. You know, I think we need to understand how we got where we are today. I don't see anybody talking about that. And I think Americans are beginning to turn these people off. You know, Democrats, Republicans, it's the uniparty. Who are we kidding? What are they doing for us? The swamp gets bigger and richer. The rest of the country gets poorer. I don't see any good outcome right now from any of these candidates. Perhaps I'm too harsh, but that's the way I feel.
Last question, and it's more a piece of tape that I want to get you to respond to, but I think it's come to a lot of people's attention. This is just so perfect that one of the spokesmen for the Ukrainian military is an American guy, leftist, dressed up like a woman. who's now wearing a Ukrainian army uniform and talking about killing Putin. Watch this.
If you look at Putin's mouth, you'll notice that blood drips from it. He's a vampire, carrying out genocide against both Ukrainians and Russians alike. Vlad Putin bathes in the blood of innocent children and enjoys it. And this is why the dictator of the Russian Federation must be deposed, and why peace talks have to be focused on President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula and the full liberation of Ukraine.
There's something so perfect about that, the convergence of every ugly anti-human trend in modern.
Is that a transgender
Life.
person?
That's a guy with fake breasts.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think everything else is fake too. We estimate that at least 60,000 children from Ukraine have disappeared, vanished since this war began. Where are they? What about all of the women that have been sold into prostitution that once lived in Ukraine? This war is a catastrophe. The people bathing in blood are in Kiev and Washington, not in Moscow. And this sort of thing is going to play well until it can't. And that's the sad part. We're going to see this whole thing collapse and implode. It's coming.
And with it, NATO?
I would think so, because the Europeans right now, Germany is well into a recession. It has systematically deindustrialized itself by casting its lot with the anti-Russian crowd. And remember that in Europe, it was not very difficult to supply stereotypes left over from the Second World War of the Soviet armed forces. The Soviet army was, an exercise in barbarism and savagery, mass rape, you name it. It was
Totally.
terrible. That's not Russia today. Russia today is a very different society, very different state. And that's been Putin's effort from day one. He's been interested in restoring Russia as an Orthodox Christian state with a true national identity and a strong national culture. That's probably another reason why so many people want to destroy Russia, because it's the last European state that has not been flooded with foreigners and turned into some sort of polyglot experiment, which is failing badly, by the way, because at some point, all of these unwanted people in Europe, and for that matter, here as well, I suspect, when things fall apart economically, it's going to get very hard on them. Because people are going to look around and they go through this, well, wait a minute, I'm an American. Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you living that way? Why are you being subsidized? I'm a German. You don't belong here. You need to go home.
I'm getting $1,400 a month in retirement that I paid into my entire life, and you just show up from Congo and you're getting $2,200.
Well, here's another one. The president announced yesterday on one of these tweets, somebody tweets for him, obviously, that the people that have lost everything in Hawaii, thousands of them lost everything, are going to receive a one-time payment of $700. Now, I haven't been to Hawaii in a long time. I'm not even sure I've ever been there, but I know that $700 isn't going to take care of a family for very long.
No.
But in the meantime, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars continue to flow into this black hole called Ukraine, which I think is an exercise in fraud, deceit, and criminality, to be blunt. So when's it going to stop? When are we going to take care of Hawaii? Let's go back to Ohio, where we had the derailment and the chemical spill. 4,000 human beings living in this area. The water is still not fit to drink, as I understand it. We wouldn't even invest the money to move those people to a safer area, even if it meant temporary housing or permanent housing, until this thing was cleaned up. What have we done? This is the problem. It is America last on every level. The last people who are consulted, the last people who are benefiting from anything that goes on in Washington are Americans. This cannot go on. It's got to end. And I think it will end. But unfortunately, it's like everything else. We're going to have to be pushed over the cliff into the abyss. I think that's where we're headed.
Well, on that cheerful note,